Good morning, I'm Robin Gibson, and this is your Harvard House Money Morsel, where we use the power of social media and video to keep you up to date with what's moving your money. I'm sitting here today with Willie Pelser, Chief Economist and Portfolio Manager at Harvard House. One of the things we do as asset managers is we spend time going to conferences where very often chief executives of big companies present. One of our themes, as you may have seen, is the digitization of the economy, and healthcare is an area that's becoming increasingly digitized. Willie, I believe you attended a conference just recently with the healthcare sector. Do you want to fill us in on what's happening and how digitization is changing this world?
Morning, Robin. Yeah, thank you. Again, it was a virtual conference. But interesting enough, I attended it in Johannesburg, but it was part of our exercise to go and see clients. But there were sort of three big themes that came out for me in this specific conference. And if you talk healthcare, there can be a lot of topics, right from the design of medication in the sense of the COVID vaccine and so on, medical aids, the physical medical companies or the hospital companies and so on. But what struck me out of these presentations this time around was sort of three themes, and I did cover it in our newsletter for coming out in the next day or two. And the first one was highlighting the fact that because of COVID, we were forced globally to stay at home or don't socialize, stay away from people. It was obviously an incredible exercise in the sense of fighting COVID. But unfortunately, what has happened, and it came out in a lot of these statistics because data is becoming prevalent in all medical companies, is the population is becoming actually more ill. And why am I saying that is they had some statistics specifically on bigger concerns from a health perspective, things like diabetes, HIV in South Africa or Africa, things like cancer. And then one that really struck me was mental health. And it's interesting if one looks at the statistics that on the mental health perspective, if we go back to sort of 2017, 2016, when they, the discovery when they presented, they went back to that date. And they said the prevalence of mental health was around 5% within their sphere of clientele. And now that has jumped to 7.3%. Diabetes specifically also were much lower from a prevalence perspective, but suddenly it's more than 5% of their sort of clientele that's facing this. Why has this happened? And he answered that question by saying preventative visits to hospitals or doctors or specialists hasn't happened. Because remember, for 2 years we were sitting on our hands. So for females like mammograms, those type of things, suddenly, as he said, that little piece of cancer or growth of cancer that sat somewhere, we picked up, or the medical profession picked up early, and they could handle it. Now suddenly he says this thing sits there. So it had a substantial effect just on preventative actually medication from that perspective or screening. So the second thing that was more interesting was actually analyzing the side effects of COVID. Because remember now, yes, you might have a friend that say, listen, my left eye is blinking suddenly, or I'm super tired, or whatever type of thing is a little niggle for an individual. So what these medical aid companies has done is they've done some surveys to say, listen, in quite a few things, what is in a survey is give us an indication. Do you have this? Do you find it difficult to do, semi-difficult? So quite a few questions, and we all know in surveys then they analyze these things. And what really stood out for me here was concentration. So they showed again, going back in the start of COVID, did people say, listen, I can concentrate, or I have a lack of concentration? And there was an indication that around 5.3% of people said, listen, I struggle a bit with concentration. 2 years in, more than 28% of the survey constituents said, listen, I'm struggling with this. Other things that came out was like walking. Obviously sleeping patterns distorted, and then self-care. People just saying, I'm so concerned that I can't care for myself. So it's some interesting stuff. And I think it ties in to the stats that I've mentioned earlier. The mental health is so different now after you had COVID, or maybe you had it twice or three times. And that has an impact, obviously, on the medical aid, in the sense they have to provide, with care. There's a cost factor to that. There's a cost factor for you as an individual, because suddenly you're buying different stuff to try and medicate, or etc., etc. And that actually brings me to the third point that I took out of the conference is, we all know medical aid or providing medical care for yourself or some form of insurance is expensive. It's a given fact globally. And what was highlighted in the conference again was the state of the cost of having medical care. Now, in South Africa, there's been talk of a national health insurance initiative type of thing, and unfortunately what came through from quite a few speakers is we just can't afford it. And it's a fiscal scenario. There's no time to discuss this. But the hospital CEOs that spoke, the medical aides that spoke, those who are in creating vaccines and medication and so on, and all say this is an expensive element. And unfortunately, for you and me, it's difficult to find the money, let alone the unemployed person and so on. But I did see last week some initiatives coming from companies like Dischem, Time Bank, offering insurance from a medical perspective. So, and one must just remember, when you analyze these things, they're different. Medical aid is totally different to medical insurance, but at least there are products coming to make it easier for you and I to afford healthcare.
So very, very quickly, Willie, we're pretty much out of time, but bringing it back to investment, the digitization in the healthcare sector, is it really helping these companies to see where the optimal returns are for the clients that are investing in them?
Yes. From a hospital perspective, by knowing the history, because history will always on paper, now it's suddenly on a little device. Also, experience, research, and so on comes up very quickly. So what's been highlighted from various aspects on digitizing is initial cost to implement this big data drive, to implement systems, but then the benefit of reduced cost, because now the trial and error factor is limited to some extent, and that's where the cost saving comes in.
Awesome. Willie, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I'm sure it's been fascinating for the viewers, as it has been for me. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button, click the bell so you get a notification of when we're releasing a new video, and thank you for tuning in.